So good morning. Happy Friday. It's always a happy Friday. April 25th. I'm Mike Berry. I'm the Executive Director of WASBO, Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials. And welcome to our monthly webinar called Money Talks. Um, and Gosh, we've got a lot of ground to cover. We have our usual crew with us. Our co-hosts are Andy Weiland from Oregon School District and Brian Adesso from Menasha. Hi guys, how we doing out there?
Work. Good.
Uh,
How are you, Mike?
I'm doing fine. I'm excited for this topic. So we've been doing money talks for a couple of years, and this one is going to be a good one. We always say for a change. So we're excited about that. So our topic is officially called the update on federal funding, but it could maybe more in the vernacular, it could be called "What in God's name is going on with federal funding?" So we are very pleased to have our colleague Tom McCarthy, the Deputy State Superintendent of Schools, on with us this morning. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning. Thanks
There
for
you
having
are.
me,
All
Mike.
right. Hey, thanks for doing this. And yeah, we really appreciate it. Normally we would spend a few minutes on Money Talks talking about the NFL draft last night or whatever. But because the topic is big and the interest level is high, I think we're just gonna dive, right in. Okay. I've got a few preliminaries to show, and then we're gonna turn it over to you to kind of give everybody the statewide update on all of this. Federal update business. I know we had to rewrite the slide deck like three times yesterday. So that shows you how late breaking this is. So all right, let's see if I can move a few screens. There's our topic. As always, we always put the mission up just so people know why we're doing what we're doing and what lane we are in. And our lane at this point is really just helping the business managers figure out what's going on. A lot of people are doing budget building right now in the school districts, and there's usually like three things that we really need, like predictability, right? Um, Revenue outside the revenue limit, and the ability to or the knowledge to explain to the school board what the heck's going on. The issue we're talking about today cuts across all three of those. So we're going to need some help. Here's our amazing panel. So myself, Andy, Brian, as per usual, and there's Tom. A little disclaimer over there on the left side of the screen. We are not attorneys, as you all know. We're not doing legal advice here. We're just trying to share the best information that we can. Okay. So. Yeah, I think this cartoon pretty much captures the conditions we can actually use this one every month now that I think about it. So this might be a recurring cartoon. But yeah, we're definitely in controversy land here. So let's start to dive in. I'll just put this slide up and then I'm going to get out of your way, Tom. So this for most of us who are busy doing other stuff, we heard about the certification issue, um, like in early April, April 2nd, April 3rd, right? And we heard that there was going to be this certification regarding non-discrim type disclosures. And then it's been kind of chaotic ever since. So, uh, so our goal here is to turn the microphone over to you, Tom, and give you an uninterrupted block of time to take us through all of this, and then we'll hear from Menasha and Oregon, and then we'll wrap it up this morning. So with that, I turn the microphone over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Brian and Andrew, too, for joining. It's dangerous to give me an uninterrupted mic, so I'm going to try to do my
And
best to provide some context
we
and
do have a
then
mute button,
answer.
by the way.
That's right. You might need it. But I'm also not going to miss my chance to say Packers taking a wide receiver in round one. I am jazzed about that. So we're not going to skip over that very
All right.
consequential fact here. And the Packers offense is frightening. So if you're not a Packer fan, beware. And the
Yeah.
NFC North is still a
Yeah.
brutal conference.
Not not as frightening as their ticket prices,
No,
but we'll
that's
discuss
right.
that some other time.
That's
Okay,
right. That's right.
on we go.
Um, so April 3rd is I appreciate you saying that's when things started to change and sharpen up for you. For us, things started to change and sharpen up all the way back in February. So usually the federal government is operating on a budget that runs similarly to your state budget cycles, where you have some tied off periods of time that relate to fiscal years. When the administrations changed between Biden and Trump, there was a short continuing resolution that took them from winter to late winter. And in February, there was another inflection point. If you remember the headlines at the time, is the federal government going to shut down? Who knows what's going to happen? They agreed to a continuing resolution in February, which is a slimmed down budget that took them to September 30th. And by and large, the way that that was messaged and seen was that K-12 funding, along with just about everything else in the federal government, was what's called flat funded. You all know flat funding. I'm not going to explain it to you. Inside of that continuing resolution, though, was a target that said we're going to try to shrink federal spending by about $1 trillion over 10 years. And inside of the continuing resolution, you started to see some policy priorities shape up as well. There were sort of sacred cows, areas in all kinds of federal spending that were untouched. And then there were things that were just left vague. So if you were following some of the deep stories at that time, that was the first point that everybody kind of realized, hey, some of these things might go away. In our world, you heard people start to talk about Title II, Title IV, Carl Perkins, some of these other things that we rely on federally that aren't the biggest footprint in your budget, but still really help push you along in service to kids. So that's when we started paying really close attention and wondering what's going to happen next. Around that same point in time, we started to see the cancellation of discretionary grants. This is not abnormal. Much as we may disagree with some of the policy choices that were made, if there was a young discretionary grant that had been given, the federal government started coming in and pulling them back. The biggest one that hit Wisconsin was actually a shared grant between UW-Madison and MPS that was targeted at increasing the number of special education teachers that were placed in MPS and trying to diversify the teaching workforce. Obviously, that had the big naughty D word in it, and that's why it got ripped away. But that amounted to about $20 million. And that was kind of the first shot, and everyone was kind of paying a little bit more closer attention at that point in time. Then came some other things. In February, we applied for and were granted a consolidation of our leftover ESSER funds to target McKinney-Vento, homeless youth kids. All of you know that was a tough one to spend down. We had a lot of underspend come back to us. We took the underspend and asked Fed if we could do a statewide activity to support kids. They said yes. We contracted with CANBE, the Child Abuse, Neglect, and Prevention Board, to start serving those kids. We were 2 months into serving them, heading into the third month with debts, when the federal government on March 28th at 5:03 p.m. canceled that grant or canceled that activity that they previously told us we could do. So this was the first time we're like, oh boy, we're in a new world now. They, after canceling it, about 5 days later said, oh, we're going to stand up a program that allows you to reapply to do these things. We took the opportunity, but we noticed the change, right? So we're now noticing a bit of a behavior change in how Fed is operating. After that, we found out about the reduction in force orders that were applied to several agencies, United States Department of Ed being one of them. Reduction in force just meaning we're pulling back the workforce significantly. To be very transparent, some of that was pandemic growth, pandemic creep in the workforce of there was a lot of money to administer. We need to make sure we have enough positions to track the spending. But some of that was starting to cut into the muscle that the agencies used to move forward. And you had some kind of intentional slicing back of programs in US Ed and in IMLS, which is the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences. DPI, we are the school and the library agency, so we're paying attention closely to how are we going to get our technical assistance and support. Some of you might have seen me talk before, and you may or may not appreciate this take from me, but sometimes even we at the SEA appreciate a little fewer bean counters looking over our shoulders. So if we're talking about fewer interventions from the federal government as to what we're doing, we're taking this calmly and trying to say what happens next. Then came Title VI. So all of what I just described was before April 3rd. this Title VI thing drops into our inboxes, and it was a vanity inbox, ocr@ed.gov, which many of you have probably become versed and familiar with, a 2-sentence letter that said, please collect this from yourself and all your LEAs, and an attachment. And inside that attachment, which we shared with you all, was a detailed understanding of the SFFA ruling, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, which you see on the screen here, that went significantly farther than what that SFFA ruling detailed, and went into kind of some undescribed and unclear applications that moved from higher ed through Title VI in terms of admitting students to a very broad definition of how DEI practices, which were not defined, would be outlawed in schools. So this may shock some of you. We decided to take a rather measured approach. We looked at some of our neighbor states. They were, pen, paper, right away suing the federal government. And we said, you know what, let's take a middle road here and ask some questions, because we still believe that there is a process the federal government can engage if they want to write rules about these things. Maybe this is sort of a precursor to that. So let's engage them. We sent a series of questions that were outlining those things. Do you have rule authority here? Are you engaging rule authority? How is this working? We've heard nothing. A few days later, the federal government, I think, realized the confusion they had created without rules and without a process, extended the deadline for another 10 days, but still answered nobody's questions. And now you saw more states posturing, right? Some states that agree with this administration saying, yeah, we're signing in blood. This is the best thing ever. Several other more left-leaning states joining a growing chorus of lawsuits saying this is wrong, or the process is wrong. And we sort of still consistently live in the process is wrong lane. So we are not trying to fight a policy fight with them. We are fighting a process fight, because good government thrives on processes. It does not thrive on politics or policy of the day. That takes us to this week now. We got another communication, which we passed out to the field, because at this point, some pieces got a little more clear, and we are trying not to withhold information, not to provide legal guidance, but to tell you the smartest thing that folks can do at this point is talk to their lawyers, because there is a lot of legaling going on through a process right now that we don't feel comfortable as the SEA running things for you, withholding things for you, or trying to decide your positions. We have a different condition than you do locally with boards, with communities. And the way we get through things like this is by being strong as a team that are sort of evaluating everything with the same mindset, but letting those local decisions fall where they may. So we passed that out to you. I believe that was the 22nd. Time as an artificial construct at this point to me. And yesterday, as all of this was unfolding, 2 courts, one in Maryland and one in New Hampshire, struck down the process that US Ed was using through actually kind of different structures. But the Maryland case is the one that actually probably has the broader authority with us, because the Maryland judge struck at the heart of the processes I've been detailing. There are several steps the federal government has to follow, just like we do at DPI, if we are going to enact a rule or policy change. None of those were followed. The end result of not following that process and rules is that we are all sort of left wandering in the dark, trying to confront a very deep and complex topic without any sort of guardrails as to how that will be applied, which means making those local decisions about what should I be afraid of, what should I be working toward, what are my goals, impossible. And it means that the federal government, in our eyes, can dictate policy on a minute-to-minute basis in an inconsistent fashion. That scares the bejesus out of us. I think that takes us to today. We are, kind of in a pattern, a holding pattern, where we're trying to figure out what happens next. But in this intermittent period, we've received some communications from districts that have said, we're signing the big US Ed oath, sending it straight to OCR. We've received several districts, I would say, now tipping into a plurality of districts that are recertifying. So they're saying, yes, we certified for Title VI already. We want to make sure we're doing that again to codify the SFFA ruling. We have another decent chunk of districts that have said, yes, we already signed off to receive federal funds. The state education agency packaged up all of that information that we pull through WISE grants, resubmitted that to the feds on April 18th. So we're just, in a chaos pattern, which I think is kind of the intent of what we're after here. So that is my unfiltered, unscripted, what is going on right now. And I'm not sure what day of the week it is, Mike. So it's probably best to answer some direct questions at this point.
Hey, okay. Well, thank you for that overview, Tom. I thought maybe we could start with one clarifying question for you, and then maybe we could hear from Brian and Andy, kind of speaking on behalf of all the school districts, because I'm sure their experience has been similar to the other 419 districts. But I think just from observer, chair here, I am not sure that I understand when DPI is speaking in a press release or a press conference on this issue. When are they speaking on behalf of the state education agency itself? Like this is DPI's position because DPI has its own, relationship to the Department of Ed. And then when or is the department speaking on behalf of the 421 districts, which would be like we're answering for the districts. The districts could just sit in the passenger seat. We at DPI are answering for them. Or when is and I think this might be the case, where the department is taking its own position and then it's advising the districts to sort of consult with legal and take their own position. So can you kind of walk me through those different relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Mike. And there's evolving philosophy based on your issues. But one of the things that I did skip over is that we are unique to you, but also deeply related to you in terms of federal funds intermingling in our functions. So DPI at this point in time, since 1990 to current, has gone from about a 80% GPR funded agency to a 35% GPR funded agency. So most of our functions have some touch to Fed at this point. And as that Fed creep has grown, the state has pulled back resources because they've realized we don't need to invest in this as much anymore. We can keep the same amount of staff and use less state resources to do it. So we're stuck in a lane where we're trying to do 2 to 3 things at the same time, which is always hard. We're trying to paint a picture of the vision for what Wisconsin needs. Wisconsin needs federal funding and it needs to be focused on kids. We are at the same time trying to protect our agency because we believe in the work that we do and its value to you. And also at the same time, we are trying to be open and transparent with the fact that local control still matters a lot right now. And when we're talking about the politics of local communities and how they evaluate things, we live in a deeply purple state. We live in a state where almost 80% of referenda questions passed in the same election where Donald Trump became president. So there has to be some space for people who are reasonable thinkers to say, I'm okay with thinking about reducing the creep of federal government or changing the specter of these things. That can be a policy choice that's acceptable. And at the same time, some rules need to be followed so that we all know how to operate within those rules. And it doesn't just become a game of if I decide one morning to take federal funding away from a school district, that school district should have some sort of due process and recourse to understand why that happened to them. So I shifted into all 3 of those profiles for you in real time here and just want to tie it up by saying we're trying to learn how to do this better in real time because we know how important it is to districts.
Thanks, Tom. I guess I want to make sure we reinforce this other point about the federal judge blocks, blah blah blah. Um, so whether you, so let's just take them in order. What if your school district ignored this deadline that was yesterday, and just said, yeah, let's just sit and wait and see what happens. The Other districts rushed to either to sign, as you mentioned, many, And some have sort of answered in between by saying, well, the DP already did that for us, so we're not playing along. So as of the moment of this injunction took effect, where where do the school districts stand? Like, do we continue to operate under the old rules until or unless we hear otherwise? Yeah, I'm just like totally confused as to where
Um,
we are and
you know, I
is there anything interfering with our expectation for 25, 26 federal funding at this point? I guess is really the kind of the bottom line question.
I am really trying my best to not be political right now, so I'm just going to say
I
this. Please know this.
totally understand.
That depends on what the president thinks about this whole situation. And, we're stuck in this weird pattern where because there aren't rules, because there aren't guidelines and guardrails, it is largely up to how the White House wants to dictate through US Ed where we stand. Normally, I would be able to tell you, hey, this is this is what would happen next. It goes here, it goes there. Like I can regurgitate to you how administrative rules process works in Wisconsin, and if this was a Wisconsin rule based on where it was set, I would tell you how it's going to function. But at this point, it's sort of a stalemate between the courts and the president, and whether the president decides that whatever ruling this ends in, whether it's the Supreme Court or these circuit courts, are we going to follow that rule or are we just going to start taking money from states? I really do not know. And that's probably the scariest part of why I lose sleep every night because it's unclear.
So, is there any federal dollars that are already in state coffers, or does that not matter because they can just ask for it back? Or
That's an awesome question, Brian. The federal government imposes a incredibly high interest rate on states that pre-draw, with the idea that the program is a all federal programs. States incur an initial cost and then they seek reimbursement. So most states, us included, run federal programs based on their grant award notifications, their GANs, and any other, formulaic expectations. And they float the money for a 2 to 4 week period, and then they draw against it with federal funds.
you're saying, just in, I guess, my terminology, we submit our grant claims. It takes about 2 weeks. In that process, your DPI is reviewing them, making sure everything's good. Then they're also submitting to the federal government for reimbursement. But there's a time in there that the money's not in the state coffers, that the state kind of picks it up for 2 to 4 weeks, and then you get made whole and we get our money before you're made whole,
That's
essentially.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And we think of it in about 2 pay periods. Sometimes some programs take a little longer to clear. It depends on how much oversight is given, but the state is floating that federal award in that period of time. The worst I've heard is a quarter. Sometimes people do quarterly sync ups. But this is my free opportunity. If you have not heard me give this speech yet, if you're sitting on claims, process them. Don't sit on them. I know that means you might have to submit more frequently than you're used to, but the more we can make sure is encumbered, the better we will all be. So please do not sit on costs for too long here.
Is
Good
there any
advice.
is there any indications on what federal funds could be at risk, or is that just anything's on the table right now?
Such a good question, Brian. When we analyzed and had the national law firm that we work with, Brubin Group, analyze the continuing resolution, they gave us and they published a sheet of places where the continuing resolution was very specific about it must continue and where it was vague that it could be cut. So we do have that information. I'm happy to share it with Mike. The problem is it's already been wrong twice. So there have already been places where the federal government has grabbed money that they said was sacred and has let go of money where they said it could be cut. So I would say, I'm happy to give the analysis over, but take it with a grain of salt because none of this matters and it really depends on what they want to do on a given day.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's been a concern of a lot of districts, which is, yeah, what is the scope? At first, people were like, well, it could be Title I, could be Title II. Almost every district gets those. And then we're like, well, it could be IDEA, right? It could be 94, 142 flow through money and special ed. And they're like, could be preschool entitlement, could be food service. And the longer you talk about it, the more you realize that how many possibilities there are. So, yeah, I guess we could certainly share the information that you have, Tom. We have to put a big disclaimer on it saying this is probably going to change by the hour, but
That's exactly
uh,
right. Yep.
at least it would, I think, perhaps help everyone sort of frame just how much is at risk here, or is being held, in abeyance until these issues get resolved.
Tom,
Um,
is there anything at the, I guess I already know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyways. Is there anything being done at the state level to strategize if this money does go away for whatever reason? Maybe it's not this certification, or if the Fed just say we're not funding schools anymore because it's a state job. I mean, is the Assembly or Senate looking at that?
I believe that the honest answer to your question here is going to maybe make your head hurt a little bit.
mm,
This is the moment where the bubble pops a little bit for us. Like, we're living in a K-12 lane. My wife works at the Department of Justice. They had a bunch of their grants canceled this week. I have good friends that work at the Department of Children and Families. Over the last 2 weeks, a bunch of their grants have been canceled. So it is not just us. This is a statewide picture that the governor's office is grappling with. They are talking with the attorney general's office very frequently about, what's our plan, but we're not acting alone. So when we're talking about what would be the impact of federal funds being pulled out of schools, the the big driver of this is us and Medicaid, because when you look at the footprint of where state spending is happening, if Medicaid gets slashed and federal funding to schools gets slashed, all of a sudden the state has to make some really big, scary choices about what to do with the surplus to just keep things at a baseline level compared to last year. So
Yeah, and
it's spooky.
I'm kind of hearing the same thing that Medicaid. I mean, it just seems like they're laser focused on that right now, and they're terrified of what that could mean for the state budget. And
right.
Mike,
Well,
we have a handful of questions in the
yeah,
chat.
we'll get there. We'll get there for
Okay.
sure.
Just
Just
want
a
to make
couple
sure you're
more.
aware.
Yeah, I was watching them go by at the bottom of my screen. Um, this may be a 6-hour marathon edition of Money Talks, but unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. Yeah, the funding, you know, we're willing to suggest that instead of $325 for 400 years, we'll go with $400 for 325 years in the spirit of compromise that we are known for.
The
We
transit
really
and property
appreciate.
there, Mike? Is that what you're up to?
I do fear though that the operating referendum line is going to get pretty long here if we continue to live with this uncertainty. Because yeah, again, these are very hard dollars to replace, and the impact is unequal, right, around the state. Some school districts have a tremendous exposure of risk because they receive a lot of federal funding, and some have very little. I imagine, Andy from Oregon is on with us. Andy's profile at Oregon has got to be very different than Menominee, as an example. So, I wanted to ask Andy and Brian kind of just tell us how this played out at your district, and then we'll get into some specific questions. So, like in terms of your admin team meetings, your board, what did you decide and how did you decide it?
So from
And
Oregon's perspective, go ahead.
seniority means you, Andy. You get to
All
go
right.
first.
So from Oregon's perspective, the first thing that happened when this all started happening was that people wanted to know what the amounts were. So, kind of sharing what those amounts were was the first thing, and trying to identify what the liability was. So, I think most districts probably did that right away. After that, I think we started trying to read the tea leaves, trying to figure out, what could go. And as Tom said before, it seems to keep changing. So, I think we're sitting there kind of on pins and needles a little bit with the uncertainty, knowing that, potentially if something does happen, that we're so late in the game, fund balance might be something that we have to look at just to kind of bridge until we can have enough time to try to figure out what's going on. So cash is king in this situation, and making sure that you have a decent fund balance and that you can maybe hold back on other things until we have a better picture of what everything is. I will say, and maybe I'm being Pollyannish here, what seems to happen in this administration is, whoever yells loudest, all of a sudden they backpedal super fast, right? So there's a hope, right, that the bigger components of this, are a little bit safer than maybe the smaller components, I guess, if I were to say it that way.
There's yet another example as to why you should have a healthy fund balance. So Andy, what did you guys ultimately do? Did the school district of Oregon send in a signed
Oh,
document saying, we're signing the certification? Did you do nothing? Did you send a letter saying this is nonsense, we're not participating? What did you guys do?
so yesterday we lost water in one of our elementary schools. So I was hanging out there trying to
Oh,
bring gallons of drinking water to kids, and deal with that. But my understanding at last I knew is that we were going to just say, we comply with the Title VI certification. We did it before, and we still are, and that's kind of where we are.
okay.
The office next to me is the legal counsel, so yeah, that could have changed, but I haven't talked to her today.
That's right. Yeah, go knock on the door, bring them over. Brian, what did Menasha end up doing as of last night?
Well, we're still analyzing the issue, and we'll be doing something today, making that decision. But we're looking at either reinforcing, what DPI sent, that we're already all certified, because we do believe that we're certified. We do it every single year. And we've seen all the legal stuff, which ranges from do nothing to do everything and in between. So it's very difficult because I don't know if anyone's looked on the internet for a review on a product. You get like 30,000 reviews, and every product's bad and every product's good, and it's the same product. And I feel like that's kind of like what we're getting for legal advice. It's either the same thing is really bad or it's really good, and it's the same decision. So it's a really difficult thing. And again, with these decisions, it's all looking through the looking glass, and what could this mean for us? And I'm not certain, and I'm not getting political at all, but I'm not certain that even if we did sign it, that there wouldn't be ramifications. Because if you sign it and they use their web crawlers and AI to analyze everything that's out there in your district, and you have something like second step on there or mention equity, did you just create perjury? So now, like, we have districts that signed it that may have created perjury because they are going to web crawl, and they already are. Our newspaper is doing it on us. Every time we change anything on equity, we get an email from them. Why'd you change it? What happened? So, like, this stuff isn't very hard technologically to do. So, I mean, we're trying to figure out, obviously no one wants to create perjury, but we also have a lot of information out there. So,
Yeah, I think there's two different kinds of risk. The risk of signing is just that. You don't know what you agreed to and whether you can comply with it. That's a big risk. Then the other risk is if you kind of thumb your nose at it, then maybe you're going to get your funds withheld. There's risk on either side, and it's all very unclear that there is a right answer.
well, and
Um,
and even
you
though the
know,
ones that are the modified, certification, like I guess I don't understand what's the difference from the modified certification and what DPI submitted. I
right.
mean,
I don't know.
it's essentially the same thing. You're not doing exactly what the federal government told you to do. So it's just, okay, now it's, DPI may have screwed up, and now the district just reinforced that they're going to screw up along with DPI, in certain people's, you
Right,
know, political views or whatever. And I don't know, when you look at the federal, like, what are you signing?
right.
I just want to jump in, Mike. I think there's a couple of things here that are jumping to me that are important to know. First and foremost, though, this is why rules are important, because understanding and knowing what is actually being expected of you allows us to follow rules. And what I've said to some of even my most conservative people I talk with, if the federal government wants to change the landscape of rules, they control Congress, they control the presidency. Go ahead and do it, and then we will follow those rules. But the vague spots that we're being pushed into are why this is painful and impossible to deal with, because it doesn't work that way. To this sort of idea of perjury, there has been pretty vocal conversations about a very old law. When I mean very old, I mean 1863, that is called the False Claims Act, which allows a private citizen anywhere in the world to take a document like the ones that were being forwarded around and signed and say, this person knowingly submitted false information to the federal government. I am going to seek civil discourse or civil recourse against them. So there is a real conversation bubbling around the United States that leads to some hard conclusions for people that signed something and just didn't have everything known and scoped. So this is real. This is not a fake political only conversation, and it will have real ramifications to people.
Tom, I assume that would, tie into the book ban and all that stuff, because I would have to imagine that all this is tying together, and we all know the group that's going to bring it forward. We don't need to mention the group, but they've been in almost every district, and they'll find anything. Yeah, it's just it's a weird situation.
Yep. And that's, again, that is why actual rules are so important, because it cannot be left to the whims of one person to make a decision about what's right or wrong. Because if that is the case, the one person should be someone that sits locally, not in Washington, D.C. or Madison. It shouldn't be, you don't want Tom McCarthy coming to your district and saying, you know what, I don't want my 6-year-old daughter reading this book, Brian. Why did you put it on the shelf? I'm not part of your district. I'm not part of your community conversations about why that choice was made. That's what democracy is all about.
Tom and I were kind of talking before that this started about, the local control. Everyone says, local control. The federal government says the state should control education, and the state says the local control. And it's all in, they're just words. They don't mean anything, because if the state really should control it, why are they telling us to certify this? Like, it should just be like, this is the state's problem. They need to, have an OCR in the state, because we're not doing it anymore.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I think what we should maybe try to do here is answer a few of the questions. Danielle, I can't see both the PowerPoint deck and everything else at the same time. So if you guys had a chance to pull a few good questions out.
Yeah, let me scroll up here and I'll read them off for you. So, and maybe some of these have been answered a little bit.
Yeah,
Any updates on REAP funding timelines? Looks like the application is still closed.
No
REAP
updates.
is no updates.
No updates on that. Okay.
REAP is REAP's in the same category as all these other federal funding situations, right?
Yeah.
In USDA, there's several of the
Yeah.
State targeted discretionary grants in USDA.
Yeah.
Is one, Farm to School is another, that have all just been like yanked back, stopped. And then there's this promise of, oh, we're going to communicate, we're going to tell you what's next. And we've heard nothing.
Good Lord. Who knew that we could politicize radishes? This is a new thing for us. Okay, let's go ahead. Danielle, hit us again.
Yeah,
Speed round.
so some clarity on timelines. So some folks have heard that federal dollars are probably still okay for 25, 26, but that we're really looking at 26, 27. So, and also some questions around could the feds deny claims for this current school year 24, 25? So just trying to get some clarity on the timelines. Are we talking 26, 27 likely Fed dollars are going to maybe be very different, or should we be concerned about 24, 25? Should we be concerned about 25, 26?
Tom, if I can set this up, at federal funding, we had a keynoter who worked for one of the big lobbying law firms out on the East Coast and DC area. But I think that what they were saying 24, 25 is basically already cooked, it's locked in. 25, 26, maybe a little risk. 26, 27, a lot of risk. But they were talking about your sort of traditional federal funding, congressional processes. this issue that we're dealing with seems to kind of jump the line and has a different kind of logic to it, right? It's a certification issue. So I think that's operating on a different timeline. What do you think?
Yeah, Mike, you set it up perfectly. I think the normal world when we talk about these things, and we use jargon as people, I count myself as like a basic version of what you all do. I know enough about school finance to be dangerous and talk to you and help the systems and structure. So I'm going to use jargon, but then explain it how it impacts here. When we talk
Okay.
about a lot of these big federal funds, we talk about them being forward funded. Forward funded in this meaning is when the fiscal year starts, they've allocated all the money. It's forward be allocated. All the formulas have been set up. The states know what to expect. The GANs are issued. What's going on with some of this Title VI stuff in the fear in the community that is real, as we've seen in other already issued GANs, is that if they decide to cancel or not pay on the grant award because of some legal compliance issue, it's not so forward funded all of a sudden. So you go to
Right.
draw your money and they say, no, sorry, you didn't comply. The money is gone. So it still sits in the bank at the federal government as an allocation that's forward funded. You just don't have access to it. So 24, 25, I think that is absolutely spot on. There's get your claims in. I'm just going to keep saying it. Get your claims in, get your claims in. But I think that fiscal year is pretty cooked. 25, 26 is going to be interesting. It's going to rely on court cases and US Ed action. 26, 27 is the Wild West. I mean, there is no telling what's going to happen, and all eyes should be on that September 30th date where the government needs to craft a new budget.
Got it. Go ahead, Danielle.
Yeah, so I mean, it looks like we answered the question around do you sign or not sign? I mean, the document that everybody,
It's
was
almost done,
getting.
but this is, yes.
Um, oh, Ian, can we get you to mute?
What's that?
Ann, can you mute? There we go.
Yeah,
Um,
Ann Chapman, if you could, I think that's yours.
yeah,
Just mute
so
that. Go ahead.
but
Go ahead, Danielle.
some questions on like what do we mean by perjury?
Okay. So Brian mentioned it earlier. Brian, why don't you want to shed some light when you say perjury? I think it's the conflict between you signed something that said you were going to do this, but then in reality you're doing that, and therefore you've lied. But go ahead, please.
And I think Tom answered it too, when, there's that old 18 or whatever you said, way back when law on that, and local groups that are, doing the book bans could come back, after we certify to say that we're not in compliance here with it. So thus we're incurring perjury and it opens us up to a legal risk.
Okay.
Good Lord.
Um,
We don't want to have a earn your
Again,
business manager license from jail program. So we'll have to get some we'll have to get some clarity around that. Okay, go ahead,
again,
Danielle.
none of us are attorneys here. So like,
Right.
yeah, yeah, none of this is legal advice.
That's right.
Yeah. So Tom, could you please explain more about how DOE staffing cuts will impact DPI and or LEAs?
Good question.
It's something we're figuring out in real time. When the federal stimulus money got issued, there was a massive need for people like yourselves to make sure that there was compliance in spending. So USED got a little bigger, right? There were more people, there were more compliance activities, there was more paperwork to pour over. As this reduction in force has taken effect, what we've seen is that it has not been just targeted at the folks that were doing just the ESSER work. So we're starting to see some pulling back of key staff in certain areas, OCR actually being one of them, because they have made it very clear, this administration, that they're not as interested in strict enforcement of some of those rules. That's not necessarily abnormal. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on, right? And we can dwell on that forever. They're pulling back the workforce, and how that starts to show and manifest itself is going to be around service to SEAs and LEAs. So when we call up and ask, hey, U.S. Department of Education, what's going on and can we get some help? The phone is just not being answered. And what is maybe a better indicator is on Title VI, Dr. Underly myself, my counterpart, Sarah Knieve, we've been burning up the phones trying to find somebody at US Ed that will answer us and dipping into some old contacts. Our good friend Michael Brickman, that used to be the Governor Walker's policy advisor, has been appointed over there. We're trying to reach him too. I think they're just overwhelmed. They have fewer staff to answer questions and they can't get back to states. Let's just hope that this is a unique situation and that when something else pops, they'll be better prepared to answer us. But the fear is that we're just losing that level of technical assistance, support, and partnership that we've always had.
Okay. Danielle, I think we got time for one or two more at the most.
Okay, so I think for the most part, that's a lot of the federal questions. There's just a couple of questions in here as well around, sort of given the volatility of the federal situation. Any updates or thoughts on the state budget? Maybe just some rumblings that we might just it might get pushed back to local districts and not get the 325 because of the 400-year veto by Tony Evers. So just kind of any updates on the biennium budget at the state level. It looks like our Fed questions have mostly been answered.
Well, I can jump in on the 325, and that's the per pupil increase on the revenue limit, and it went into law, so it's the law, and it was upheld by the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, what, about a week ago? I think the only possible downside there is that the legislature might not have much appetite for anything higher than the 325, right? It becomes in some ways perhaps both a floor and a ceiling. And that's a political consideration. Legislature might be like, we don't like the way the governor pulled this off. So we're not going to give you 375 or 425 or whatever. So we kind of expect that to be an issue. But our big focus is to get to inflationary increases. It doesn't have to be, that's just the goal, inflationary. 325 is probably a little short of that. So that's going to create a bit of a gap for school districts. On the other hand, if we can make the long overdue progress on special ed categorical funding, that combination might put districts back in at least within shooting range of a balanced budget. It's going to be tough. So that's a state issue. I have a lot of empathy for school district budget builders right now. It's late April. You're really not sure, what anything is going to come out of the state budget. Now you've got all this federal complexity. You might even have some just beyond the horizon, some uncertainty around the expenditure side of Act 10. What could its repeal or its modification mean on the expenditure side? So it's more unknowns than knowns. So all you can do in this situation is continue to update your administrative team and your board and make sure they know just how limited your insights really are at this point. And it's just good practice to keep reminding them, almost as a job preservation thing, to say, look, we don't know everything. So it's important that you know that too. Okay, I wanted to kind of go for the final, Tom, give us like your, top 2 or 3 takeaways for your, for the fictional Two Twigs school district out there somewhere in the state. What are the key takeaways on this federal situation? I guess number one was consult your local attorney, local decision on how to respond. That's the
On the
reason
legal
maybe
side, yeah.
number one?
Yep, on the legal side, absolutely.
Okay.
And I guess I would say on top of that, start from where I began the conversation about the fact that the government is operating on a continuing resolution that hits an inflection point at the end of September. And understand that one of the policy targets of this administration and this Congress is to reduce federal spending by almost $1 trillion over a decade. So the activity they're trying to do is reduce spending, not just to K-12, but to all activities. And I think the thing you got to keep in the back of your brains is that probably means that the amount of federal funds getting into our schools is going to go down before something else happens. And, unless the world completely starts spinning in a different direction by September or political pressure changes, the target is going to be reducing spending. And this whole activity about Title VI and certification and signing and who has the authority to dictate how that spending happens, that's a political conversation. But the policy target still exists, and everyone agreed on it and voted on it. They want to reduce spending. It's hard to reduce spending. So there is going to be some jockeying and fighting, and who controls how that happens, that's natural. But they're trying to cut the federal budget.
Has
Okay.
the state seen any activity from the feds on looking for fraud and abuse under DOE yet? I mean, I'm assuming that's on the list somewhere and they haven't gotten to it.
Not yet. I mean, the the folks that were doing that were really looking carefully at all ESSER spending. I can tell you that much, but they also got eliminated. So all of the inspector general's offices across all of the federal government were nuked. So the people that would naturally do that work are gone. They all got fired.
Wow. Okay. Andy, any last comments from you before we start to move up or wrap up?
We start talking about the draft again.
You know, I I
I
um
agree.
I can say this, Tom, that you mentioned earlier that federal funding for museums and libraries are also in the same boat. If um if somehow the Packer Museum and Hall of Fame are affected by this, the GOP will not win in Wisconsin again for 20 years. So I think that is for most Wisconsinites when they've gone too far. Um, well, you got to end with a little humor here. I guess ultimately the message is hang in there. Okay, so one last question. How do we know when any clarity is going to be brought to this? Right now, you've got an injunction, so it's tied up in the courts. This could be, I'm assuming, weeks or months before we get any final word on this certification business.
I think, I'm going to just pontificate for a second here. The reason I keep hammering the September 30th time is because I think that date matters a lot more than what's going to happen with the courts. I think with the courts, you're looking at a case that's probably headed to the Supreme Court, and you're going to have a lot of jockeying that's going to be happening at the circuit court level. I think other states are going to file different attacks at this process too. So, buckle in for the long haul there, and remember
Yeah,
on September 30th, if the federal government doesn't do something to pass a larger, more stable budget, the federal government shuts down.
got it. Oh, this is no way to run a railroad, as my grandfather used to always say. Okay, well, here's some good news. It's Friday, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. Especially want to thank Tom McCarthy and his colleagues at the department for sharing their expertise with us. And I guess one other announcement would be that we are on again on May 30th. Friday, May 30th, with the next always exciting episode of Money Talks. And for some of you, if you've not signed up for the spring conference at the Kalahari in a couple of like mid-May, please take a few minutes to do that. So with that, I'm gonna wrap up here and say thanks again, and hopefully we'll see you down the road. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.